about was, is artificial intelligence an existential risk for humankind? And let me just say at the very beginning that there is a consensus opinion amongst scholars and writers and intellectuals, thinkers, philosophers, practitioners. The consensus view is, yes, artificial intelligence does pose an existential risk. Why does it pose an existential risk? Primarily because AI is closely modeling human intelligence. So if you look at what are called deep learning neural networks, for which a Nobel Prize was awarded this past October. So AI is modeled on deep learning neural networks, which closely mirrors human intelligence and the manner in which humans process information. AI is trained on all of human knowledge, so all of the books we've ever written, all of the articles we've ever written, all of the content that's available on the internet. So on a theoretical basis, if humans can pose an existential risk, which is actually the subject of the book, then yes, it's reasonable to conclude that, of course, AI can also pose an existential risk. And we see it from the empirical evidence as well, and I'll try and touch on some of those empirical evidence, and that coming from some of the most preeminent thinkers and scholars and practitioners in AI. So let me briefly introduce the book. The book is called A Trinity of Existential Risks. You may remember back, many of you, about 40 years or so ago, we were in the midst of the Cold War. And this was a very, very dangerous moment in human history. Probably the most dangerous moment between the United States and the Soviet Union. There are approximately 75,000 nuclear warheads. Now these warheads are considerably more dangerous than the warheads that were detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are in many cases what are known as thermonuclear weapons. The ones detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki are fission bombs. Just to give you some sense of how much more dangerous they are, the thermonuclear weapons will use fission bombs as the catalyst to trigger thermonuclear war or thermonuclear explosions. So they are 50, 100, 200 times more lethal in terms of their kilotons of TNT, equivalent of explosive capability. So this is dangerous because we, of course, the central thesis of the book, if you fast forward to the present, is that we were living with just one existential risk for the past many decades. And today, we are dealing with at least 3 existential risks. And I'll go into each of them in a little bit of detail and focus more on the AI and draw us towards that. But the first existential risk is we are living in a world where we are in transition from a unipolar world order to perhaps a bipolar or multipolar world order. Perhaps it's a hybrid. Perhaps it's a period of just anarchy before we settle on some kind of new order. And in that environment, we've gone from having just 2 nations with nuclear weapons, the United States and Russia, to having 9. So right now we have 6 in Asia and 3 in the West. In Asia, we have China, we have North Korea, we have India, we have Pakistan, we have Israel, and we have Russia. And in the West, we have the United States, we have France, and we have the United Kingdom. Now, what's really extraordinary here is that we used to have so many treaties in place, things called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties. We have treaties like Strategic Arms Reduction Talks. Today we have 9 nuclear powers. Very quickly we can add a 10th with Iran, and we have no nuclear treaties in place anymore. There's one treaty in place that remains between the United States and the Soviet and Russia, and that's set to expire in probably 10 or 12 months. I think January of 2026 that will expire. We have China coming online very, very rapidly, refusing any kind of discussion about containment of this technology. The United States is the only country in the world who's willing to say we will not employ artificial intelligence in our nuclear program. So we won't regulate our program, we won't make deployment decisions, we won't react based upon feedback from AI. It's still under the control of humans. None of the other countries are willing to to make this kind of commitment. The United States and Russia are the only two countries that have what's called triad capability. So this means you can launch these weapons from ground-based silos. These are intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads that are on the tip. You can launch them from nuclear-armed submarines, and you can launch them you can deliver them by air. So this is called nuclear triad capability. And the United States and Russia are the only two with this capability, and China is refusing to get involved in any kind of limitation or reduction treaty. They feel it's their right to also develop this triad capability. In terms of surveillance, the United States has very, very sophisticated infrared technology and AI that they use to monitor nuclear activity around the world within So within a few seconds, the United States, using infrared technology, can determine, whether a launch has taken place. But the other surveillance systems from the other countries are very unsophisticated. They can confuse things like clouds and rays of sun for signals of nuclear launch. So this, of course, very, very dangerous scenario. We don't hear about it very much. We're more focused on some of the day-to-day conflicts that are taking place around the world. But we're seeing that we are progressing in the wrong direction. You see the sort of the doomsday clock being advanced further towards midnight. These things are happening quite quietly, and because we're so focused on day-to-day issues, we don't really take awareness, that this is happening. With regards to the second existential risk we're facing. So we're going from one existential risk now to the second one. In the past, we had just one. The second existential risk is, of course, related to climate change and ecological collapse. We are seeing the melting of sea ice, or the melting of glaciers, the rising of sea levels. We are seeing the increase in very aggressive weather events like fires and storms. Again, all progressing in the wrong direction. And then finally we come to fourth industrial revolution technologies like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, computing, advanced computing like quantum and supercomputing, and data science, and evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, fission, fusion, gene editing, germline editing, genomics, the ability to breach the barriers of evolutionary biology using CRISPR-Cas9. We can now go into the sperm, into the egg, into a fertilized egg, and we can do edits which then propagate immediately into the next species or in the next progeny. And so, the ability to contain these things is really quickly getting out of hand. Dr. Stuart Russell at University of California, Berkeley is saying that for every $1,000 that we are currently spending on the research and development on commercial and military applications of artificial intelligence, so for every $1,000 we're spending there, we're spending $1 on AI safety. So it really calls into the question that, when humans have so much intelligence and humans are able to create existential risks, and we're unable to contain those existential risks, and artificial intelligence is modeled on human intelligence, and it's trained on human knowledge, then it presents us with the question that what kinds of existential risks can artificial intelligence create for us on its own? So let me talk a little bit more about human intelligence, because we tend to think that all that we have achieved, this level that we have reached in this world, this apex of this world, or even beyond the apex, the apotheosis, because now we have these qualities that seem to go beyond human ability, where we are intervening in, as I was saying, using CRISPR-Cas9 and gene editing capabilities, and reaching the boundaries of evolutionary biology. It's not just human intelligence that is really at the heart of this. There's something, and I write about this in my book, called the nexus of human exceptionalism. So there's something more than just human intelligence at play here. If we look at our species and we go back, about 250,000 years in the Rift Valleys, so this is near Lake Zambezi and the Zambezi River in East Africa. This is the earliest known evidence that we have of our species, of sapiens. If we look at the geography quickly of Africa, at the top we have North Africa along the Mediterranean coast, and we call it mantle, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and below this we have the Sahara, and below the Sahara we have the Sahel, and below the Sahel we have the Savannah, and then if you go a little past the Savannah we go into Southwest Africa, once again into the Kalahari Desert. This is the general geography of Africa, but somewhere in the middle band in the Savannah, in the eastern edge of the Savannah near Tanzania, is where we find the earliest evidence, and we could call it settled science. So there's wide consensus that our species is about 250,000 years old. There are some examples found in North Africa, along Mantle, Morocco, Algeria, in this area, which are probably 300,000 years old, but not quite settled science yet. So we still go with this 250,000 year number. And what's extraordinary is for most of this 250,000 year period, although human intelligence is there, we find ourselves somewhere in the middle of this of the food chain. We are not at the apex. Even today, if you place us in the forest or in the savannah, there are apex predators there, and we're likely to perish, if we come into conflict with them. So it's not human intelligence in and of itself that has brought us to this apex. And this is very important to understand in the context of artificial intelligence, because if there is an apex of human exceptionalism, there's probably an apex of AI exceptionalism as well. So what exactly are those attributes or characteristics that really distinguish us? What we see about 70,000 years ago, there is a clear demarcation, and the scholars in this field will call it the cognitive revolution. There seems to be a significant change that's taken place in us. We're not sure if it's a genetic mutation or how properly to characterize it, but we definitely see this migration pattern out of East Africa into the Arabian Peninsula, into South Asia, further north, west into Europe, east into Asia. And what we see that's really extraordinary is this precipitous decline in the population of what's called terrestrial megafauna. So terrestrial megafauna, terrestrial means land-based, mega means large, and fauna animals. So you see this precipitous decline. Wherever sapiens is arriving, we're seeing this precipitous decline in the presence of terrestrial megafauna. Something has changed in us. And we think what that change is this extraordinary ability that we have learned to cooperate with each other. We have developed this ability for what we can call building networks of cooperation. And we see this in other species as well, very wide scale cooperation amongst ants and bees and birds and various schools of fish and migratory patterns. But on a very large scale, they tend to be very rigid. So they'll cooperate, but in very, very rigid ways. Or you'll see cooperation amongst species that are genetically very close to us, like bonobos and chimpanzees, and you see that there's flexibility in their cooperation, but the scale is very small. But then you see humans, and you see these extraordinary examples of cooperation, like they would start a fire, and this would cause animals to panic, because animals, with the exception of humans, almost all animals panic from fire, and they will rapidly move in one direction, and the humans would set a trap, so when the animals reached the other end, they would have a frenzy, stabbing them with spears and axes and whatnot. And so we became these extraordinarily efficient hunters, and this is why you see this precipitous decline in terrestrial megafauna. So this is our first signal that something has changed, and it seems to be this ability to build these networks of cooperation amongst our species. Now you fast forward, many tens of thousands of years, and we come to Egypt, and we see this extraordinary example in the plains of Giza, where we have the pyramids of Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, and their father who was Senufru. Senufru was the father of Khafre, the grandfather of the father of Khufu, the grandfather of Khafre, the great-grandfather of Menkaure. It's the face of the second son, Khafre, who you see on the Sphinx. Senufru was building the pyramids, but then he died, and his youngest son, Khufu, takes over, and then he completes the first pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and it's his tomb. And the extraordinary thing when we reflect on this is just the complexity of human networking and networks of cooperation that we can employ to build a pyramid. You think about how many tens of thousands of people are involved. Where do you feed? How do you feed them? Where do you house them? What about all of the logistics? How are you bringing these 2 and 3 ton blocks of stone? Where are you bringing them from? How are you harvesting them? How are you shipping them up the Nile? How are you moving them to the site? How are you elevating them? How are you laying out the architecture so perfectly? How are you doing the internal design, the chambers, the tomb? It is really, really a remarkable testament, not just to human intelligence, but to this ability to build these networks of cooperation. So as far as I can see, these are the 2 extraordinary elements of this nexus of human exceptionalism that has pushed us to this apex and beyond. Another absolutely phenomenal example most of us probably remember is from July 20th, 1969. Many of you remember Neil Armstrong, planting a flag on the moon and saying, "One small step for man and one giant leap for mankind." This project, when JFK proposed the project in 1962, we had a nascent NASA, and they laughed at him and said, "It's just impossible. We have no idea how to do this." And his response was, "Okay, you're all fired. I'm going to hire people who have the confidence to try and figure this out." And of course, threatening with being fired gives you a fresh perspective. And they got to work, and July 20th, 1969, 400,000 American men and women, employed by 20,000 American institutions, corporations, and organizations, cooperated from the most simple thing of a talented woman needleworker sewing the parachutes and uniforms by hand, the spacesuits by hand, to the most complex work done at MIT to develop the lunar control modules, the hand-coded control modules. They achieved this extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary thing. So you're seeing this nexus of human exceptionalism. But the extraordinary thing about this nexus of human exceptionalism is we took this, and this was July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m. and 22 seconds after the hour. There's a test conducted at White Sands, New Mexico. The test is called Trinity, and the device is called Gadget. And this is a test of the first fission bomb under the auspices of the Manhattan Project. This is Dr. Robert Oppenheimer reporting to General Leslie Groves, who oversees the entire Manhattan Project. And 3 weeks later, this is detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is the first time in 250,000 years that we have faced an existential risk that we ourselves are responsible for. Now we fast forward to the present, and I went through the other existential risks that we are facing. And what really is perplexing is, how is it that this extraordinary species that sits at the apex of the world, and that has pushed even beyond the apex and is breaching the barriers of evolutionary biology, if you look at each of these existential risks, we're moving in the wrong direction. We're seeing a breakdown in world order. We're living through the most peaceful time in human history in 12,000 years since the birth of agriculture and the birth of civilization in Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. We have had incessant war, incessant imperial rivalries and conflict. And in the post-Second World War environment, we established this international rules-based system, and it has led to extraordinary peace in our time. My family and I were in France in December, and we visited Versailles. And some of you may have visited Versailles if you haven't. Really an extraordinary place to go. But from this place, Louis XIV managed his court, and he expended 50% of the budget of his state on the military. 50% at peacetime. In wartime, they were expending 80% of the budget of the state on militarism. Today, you go to France, they can barely, the NATO requirement under Stoltenberg was that you maintain 2% of the revenue of the state allocated towards defense. The new incoming Secretary General, Mark Rutte, is asking for 3%, and our president is asking to push this to 5%. Across the world today, it's probably in the range of 5 or 6%. Most countries are, as a percentage of their revenue of the state, what they're expending on militarism, on national defense. Compare this to 50%, 70%, 80%. This was norms around the world to expend this level of expenditure. Today, if you go in Spain and Portugal, these were imperial powers. They used to colonize all over the world. Today, they barely spend 1% of the revenue of the state on the military. They say we're so far away. We're sitting here on the Atlantic coast, so far away from all this conflict in Eastern Europe and Russia and the Middle East. Why do we need to bother with that? So and you go in France, they're going to ask them to push the budget up to 3%. You can imagine what they're going to say. How are we going to pay for health and education and welfare initiatives and housing? And how are we going to look after children and after school programs? And how are we going to look after the indigent and the poor and so on? You can see that shift that has taken place. But somehow, even this extraordinary species that has reached this apex of this world with these existential risks, it's unable to contain. It's unable to contain itself. So what's going on here? In my book, I write about almost like a two-sided coin. So we have this nexus of human exceptionalism on one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is, I call it the doctrine of the divine paradox. The doctrine of the divine paradox. Essentially what it says is, this far, but no further. You human, with your intelligence, with your capacity to cooperate, you can go this far, but no further. And this is why these existential risks have come and are increasing. Let me spend a bit more time on AI now. So just to give you a sense of how extraordinary progress we're making with artificial intelligence, I'll just touch on two major examples. There's an ancient game called Go. It's a Chinese game, maybe East Asian, 3,000-year-old game. And we have grandmasters who have been playing and studying. It's part of intrinsic to the East Asian culture that a very cultured person would know this game and have mastered it. And in 2017, a company in the UK called DeepMind, founded by a man named Genesis Abis, Shane Legg, and Mustafa Suleiman, these three men formed this company. It's kind of like a Bell Labs kind of institution, industrial R&D. Had a tremendous cash burn rate of about $1 billion a year, so unsustainable, and they let themselves get acquired by Google. Under Google, they were asked if they could learn how to play this very sophisticated game of Go, and then maybe they could be put up to challenge the Grandmaster, the ultimate Grandmaster, a Korean gentleman by Lee Sedol. And so they arranged a 5-day match, and they brought AlphaGo, which is their AI, to play against Lee Sedol. And over 5 days, they played 5 matches, 1 match a day, and they won 4 out of the 5 matches against Lee Sedol. And he was absolutely, he could not believe what was happening. In one game, I think it was the 3rd game, the AI made a very, very strange move, something he'd never seen before, something that really perplexed him. And he thought, this AI is really quite stupid. Why would it make this move? 100 moves later, Lee Sedol could see why the AI made this move. And of course, it lost this game. So here you have on one side 3,000 years of knowledge of how to play this game. And here you have this AI agent that's been playing against itself at AI speed, right, at computing speed, for about 3 or 4 months. And there's nobody anywhere that can beat this AI agent anymore. Another really important example, and we see for the first time that artificial intelligence is winning Nobel Prizes now. This autumn, Dr. Geoffrey Hinton, who is known as the godfather of artificial intelligence, he won the Nobel Prize for physics. His work was the deep learning neural networks, essentially modeling AI learning after human neural networks. So we have a neural density of about 100 billion neurons, a synaptic density of probably 100 trillion neurons, or 100 trillion synaptic links, and we're kind of constrained by this cranium. We really cannot do any better than this. But with AI, you can advance the number of processors, the scale. You can, of course, AI can process much faster than us. AI can take in all of the data, so all the books that have ever been written in any language that's available digitally, all of the medical articles, scientific articles, it can cross-reference all of that. So a phenomenal example of what the second Nobel Prize that went to AI, went to chemistry, to Dr. Hassabis, Dennis Hassabis, who was one of the co-founders of DeepMind, and to his colleague John Jumper. And what they did was, they were asked, shortly after AlphaGo, the game that defeated the Go, they were asked by a group of structural biologists that, look, we have this over 50-year-old challenge in structural biology, and we don't know how to solve this problem. Do you think AI can help us with this? And this is, can you help us determine the three-dimensional shape of a protein? Now, in the body, in the ribosome in the cell, when the cell expresses amino acids, about 20 amino acids, they will come together and form various proteins. I think they can take the shape of about 10 to the power 70 different shapes. And the shape of the protein is really important because proteins can be pathogens. And these pathogens, as nanomachines in our body, can do enormous harm. So if you can determine the three-dimensional shape of the protein, you then have a very good start on can you figure out how to develop a chemical compound that can bind to the protein in an optimal way so you can disintermediate the protein or disable the protein so that in the body its pathological capacity is diminished. Now, for each of those proteins, when they're formed in the body, there's about 20,000 of them. Each one of them takes a doctoral student probably about 5 years to figure out what that three-dimensional shape is, if they're lucky. They may fail after 5 years. They can use X-ray crystallography and various techniques to try to determine the shape of that protein. But along comes DeepMind and says, let us see if we can use AI to do this. Now, in the known universe, there are about 200 million proteins, and each of them can have a distinct shape. So 200 million times about 5 years to figure out the shape of each protein, that's 1 billion years worth of work. AI in 2020, an AI application from DeepMind called AlphaFold. AlphaFold determined the shape of all 200 million proteins. So they publish this openly for the scientific community. Everybody has access to this. Every pharmaceutical company, every scientific researcher, every disease researcher has access. So they have a huge head start. Right away they know the shape of the protein. They can and now here you see AI coming into play because some of these 200 million proteins can be pathogens for which it's very difficult, if not impossible, to disintermediate them or to disengage them. Now, if you have a nefarious actor who can use AI to try and identify which of these proteins might be pathologized or weaponized, you can see the risk of biological weapons. You put this on the head of a warhead, or if you use aerosols or water and spread this throughout a society, you can see the danger and the existential risk that you pose to humankind from this. Yeah, I think I forgot something I wanted to share with you. This goes back to Los Alamos, and this goes back to White Sands, New Mexico. And I was talking about the dangers of what happened on July 16th, 1945. Now we're taking, if some of you remember your periodic table of elements, when you go to sort of the extreme right lower corner where you have the heavy metals like uranium and plutonium and the isotopes of uranium and plutonium, these are the elements, these are the isotopes that you use to engage, to develop fission. On the other end of the periodic table, towards the top left, you have elements like hydrogen and isotopes of hydrogen, like deuterium and tritium, and it's these that you fuse together in order to create what's called a thermonuclear weapon. And so this is essentially how the sun works. The sun works by having constant thermonuclear reactions taking place. And I was saying earlier, you use a fission bomb, or a small fission bomb, to actually catalyze this nuclear reaction. Now, once this nuclear reaction is underway, what can happen is it's very difficult to contain it. So now you need to predict the movement of the atoms as this fusion is taking place. Once again, you see artificial intelligence coming into place, where they're using the artificial intelligence to try and determine in advance where the plasma is moving, where it is moving inside the chamber where you're having this, because the fusion reaction, if it touches the chamber, it will immediately shut down. So you have to predict where the plasma is going to go, and so again, you're using artificial intelligence in this capacity. So yeah, just some thoughts to share with you. I wanted to introduce the book also to you, and the book goes into quite a bit of detail about how we can actually prevent this from happening. You know, this nexus of human exceptionalism on one side, and this doctrine of the divine paradox on the other side. This evidence that we're seeing that we're unable to prevent ourselves either in the breakdown of world order, which is putting us at risk from nuclear, or how we're unable to contain the climate change and ecological collapse that's taking place, and how at the same time we're unable to contain the advanced technologies in the fourth industrial revolution. And so the book talks about a strategy of how we can use multilateralism to try and get our hands around some of these problems. So with that, let me turn it over to any of you who might have some questions.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the talk. A couple questions, I guess, because we've had a trinity of questions, but I want to get your thoughts on the concept of nuclear deterrence. I know that for folks, it's about essentially two nuclear powers are less likely to get into a large-scale conflict if they're both nuclear armed. I want to get your thoughts on that, and then specifically around AI. What do you think is a bigger risk when it comes to AI? Is it the military application, or is it the potential societal disruption? So like mass layoffs and what have you. Just want to get your thoughts on those two concepts.
Sure.
Yeah, your comment on nuclear deterrence, I think it has worked for a long time, and that was mostly with two large powers. This was in an environment where we had a well-established unipolar world order or bipolar world order that eventually transitioned to a unipolar world order. We have seen peace on Earth in these last 30, 35 years like we've never experienced before. We are seeing a breakdown in that. We are seeing the country that was the principal proponent of that world order and the principal upholder of that world order now backing away, returning to isolationism, returning to kleptocracy and plutocracy and oligarchy, and these are all very bad signs. You see this amongst the three major powers. You see it in Russia, you see it in China, you see it in the United States. Probably the only great power that still seems to have a good head about them is the European Union. As I said before, the cat really is out of the bag with nuclear weapons. You have 9 nations with them. It's very worrisome what kind of controls those weapons are under. Nobody's willing to commit to not using AI to manage those portfolios of weapons, with the exception of the United States. The United States, thankfully, has a very, very robust system in place. In a fraction of a second, it can determine that a nuclear launch, hot rocket exhaust from an intercontinental ballistic missile in a fraction of a second. Using infrared technology, you can determine if that's taking place. Russian systems will confuse clouds, sun rays, for a nuclear launch. And once this is unleashed, and these weapons start firing back and forth, you cannot recover them. Once an ICBM is launched from a nuclear silo, or once it's launched from a nuclear-armed submarine, you don't recall that. They're on a trajectory. They're going to deliver their warhead or a triplicate of warheads to to the destination. So that is immensely dangerous. If you employ AI here, the danger is that AI is still pretty transparent. AI will, if you ask it, how did you reach your decision? In a fraction of a second, it can give you a decision and say, do this, because if you don't, this is going to happen. And you ask it, how did you reach this decision? I said, no problem, I'll send you a PDF. You get the PDF and it's 10,000 pages long. And you're going to need 6 months of your best scientists to try and understand the statistical modeling and the algorithms and the thought process that is put into reaching this decision. You just don't have that time. So now you're transferring agency over to AI. So in the second part of your question, you're touching on the military dangers of AI. Employing AI in a military context, this is one of the chief dangers. It's not necessarily obtuse or opaque in saying, I won't tell you how I reached my decision. It's just that you and I don't have the capability of understanding its decision. No more so than Lisa all could understand why AlphaGo made the decision that it couldn't see for 100 moves later, or why for 55 years humans could not understand how to determine the three-dimensional shape of a protein, and AI did it in such a short period of time.
Yeah, so,
sorry, are there any questions from the room? Back and forth. Okay, you do, let me know.
thank you very much for the very interesting topic and discussion that you brought up. I have a question on AI specifically. Which generation of AI we are in right now, and what you are predicting or what you are thinking about, by which generation is going to become existential threat to us, just like a nuclear weapons are. One clarification I need from you is you mentioned only 2 countries in the nuclear triad. I believe there are more than 2 countries, but I just want to clarify, you mean by 2 major countries or not the minor ones?
I think to my knowledge, I could be incorrect. To my knowledge, at present, it's only China and Russia, United States and Russia, and China is working round the clock to achieve that as well. That's a very sophisticated capability. So as far as I know, it's only the 2 with the 3rd on track. And regarding the generations, I think if you speak to AI experts, be they thinkers and writers like myself, philosophers, scholars, researchers, practitioners, all of them will agree. There's a consensus view that AI is an existential risk. Where they differ, and you're alluding to that, is it 5 years from now? Is it 10 years from now? Is it today? What is that risk? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 80%? Is it 90%? I tend to fall into the camp that it's going to happen a lot sooner. We may be there. I would argue also that the risk is much higher than 50%. So I would say I'm very closely aligned with Dr. Hinton, who was the godfather. He actually left Google so he could speak freely about AI, and he gives examples where, because he's been behind the firewall. So most of us have not been behind the corporate firewall where we can see feral AI agents. We see only domesticated AI agents. So our perspective is shaped by the domesticated agents. What's happening with the feral agents behind the firewall is considerably more frightening. And Dr. Hinton refers to those. He can give examples where they show thinking, that they are thinking. They can tell lies, very sophisticated lies. I'll give a very quick example of a lie that it told that's really extraordinary. The trainers put it on, this is GPT-4, they put it on a website and said, complete this task on this website. Complete the task very quickly. And then it was prompted on the website to complete a captcha puzzle. If you're familiar with captcha puzzles, you have these 9 squares, and tell me which of these squares has like a bicycle in it. And this is something very difficult for an AI to do. So you see the incredible thought process of the AI. It opens another window, and this is TaskRabbit. And it tries to hire somebody to solve the captcha puzzle for it. And it asks, the person comes online and says, yeah, sure, I'll help you. Well, why do you need help solving a captcha puzzle? Are you an AI? Are you a bot? And this is chilling. Its response is, no, I'm not a bot. I'm human. I have a vision impairment, so I cannot see properly. And so now that person with empathy said, oh God, I'm so sorry I asked you that. Of course I'll help you. with that. So you see the cunning, the lying capability. And this is not nefarious, but this is learning from human intelligence that there are ways to achieve goals, that even if you don't have legitimate information to solve the problem, you can use these other tactics to do it.
Thank
Nobody from the ladies side. Whoever.
Yeah, one question. You talked about the negative side, obviously, and that's certainly there, but on the positive side, right now we know that most of the repetitive jobs are vulnerable to being replaced by AI. I remember back in 2016, during the tail end of Obama administration, they published a statistic that said that people who are making $20 an hour or less, mostly repetitive jobs, those are the most vulnerable. They will go away in the next 5 years. That was their prediction. If we fast forward 10 years from now, what kind of new jobs do you see that could be created by AI that don't exist today?
It's a very, very good question. I love this question. I hear it sometimes. I think the first thing is behind closed doors. If you listen to AI experts, what they say is, we're experiencing throughout the developed world, population declines. We have more and more elderly people, fewer and fewer younger workers. So we worry that we're going to need a lot of migration, immigration in order to bring in people to do the work. Behind closed doors, these people are saying they're not worried about it in the medium term because AI is so good, even today, on disembodied AI, which means sitting at a computer screen processing data. But even with embodied AI, to talk about robotics, the scale and the rate of improvement is so impressive that people are, behind closed doors are not so concerned about the declining birth rate in developed economies because of this. Your point's still well taken. I think, it's not really a question of whether you're earning $20 an hour or $200 an hour. It's more a nature of what kind of work you're doing. So if you're very much involved with work behind a screen, the probability that your job will go is very, very high. Anything you're doing, as you point out, is repetitive in nature, whether it's intellectually repetitive or whether it's physically repetitive, is actually more defensive. If you think about like somebody who's a physical therapist, that's still very hard to replace. Or you're talking about a nurse in a hospital who's very physically active with a patient. That's still today very difficult to replace. The physician is much more replaceable. A lot of the abilities that the physician has can be more and more. It's not happening today. It's not happening in 5 years. 10 years from now, they're saying that the current generations of CEOs today is probably the last generation that will manage an exclusively organic workforce. In other words, it's going to shift very soon to organic and inorganic workforce. A lot of the employees will be 24/7, 365 inorganic AIs, and that transition will continue. There will be challenges, of course. We'll run into problems that we can't yet do this or we can't do that. So if you look at a mountain, for example, we're in the foothills. We're conquering all those. We'll get to the top of the mountain. That's quite likely. I think. Yes, please.
So my question is that if these artificial intelligence can master, trying to be successful in an object by lying or cheating or anything, so other things can happen too. Is there any danger of their controlling the humans and eliminating them at some point, and also creating wars and other things, because all this comes with the territory of succeeding at any cost?
No, I think that's absolutely right. Those are, when we talk about existential risks, I was talking about, when you have 200 billion proteins, some of those you may not be able to disintermediate or find a way to, and they may be pathogens. And if a nefarious actor determines that they found some of those, even if they can be at some point disintermediated, but it takes time, in that time window, they can take that and weaponize it. So yes, you can of course use, there's swarming technology taking place now. So you have these $20 million Abrams battle tanks that the Americans have spent billions developing. They're so vulnerable now. They're like, if you swarm them with drones, military drones, they can destroy a $20 million battle tank using a swarm of drones that might cost a couple of $1,000s. So the entire battlefield, the landscape is changing very rapidly. So militarism is a huge risk from AI, absolutely.
So, thank you. I know you have touched on the limits, like divine providence and that. So the other day I was trying to create, doing a simple thing using AI, creating a video, realistic video with image. And it is so easy and so simple. And if these kind of computational powers then fall into the hands who are not ethical, right? Where are we headed in that direction? The regulatory bodies are there as much active as the companies, DeepSeek and all that, trying to create all those billions of trillions of dollars through the marketplace. But how far is the regulatory mechanism playing catch?
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really important question. Let me explain this by talking just a bit about democracy and the risks to democracy from the kinds of things that you're bringing up. For 12,000 years that we have, since we've transitioned from being foragers, hunter-gatherers, to forming settlements and villages and towns, it has never been possible to have democracy, except in the last couple of hundred years. And the reason for this is democracy, over and above, requires two attributes in humans. First and foremost, I need to be able to reach you with some kind of technology so you can have information about what the issues are. And, we never had any kind of communication technology. Today, of course, we have radio and we have television, we have internet and whatnot, and we have books and newspapers. For most of human civilization, we didn't have any of these things. The second problem we had was that even if I could present you with information, human literacy was historically probably just 2%, 3%. It was only the elites, the royals, the nobles, the aristocracy, the clerics who knew how to read and write. The vast majority of humankind, 95%, were engaged in agriculture. From daybreak to sunset, they're planting crops and harvesting crops, and they're herding animals, what we might call agro-pastoral living. And in agro-pastoral living, when the major threat in life is war, infectious disease, and famine, and you have infant and child mortality rates of 40%. Nobody has time to or can afford to send their children to learn how to read and write. So this is all a very new phenomenon that democracy was possible, and it became possible because most people know how to read and write, and most people can think a little bit. They have some education. So democracy works even today in just sort of a rudimentary way because of those two attributes. Now what's happening is that with the kind of technology that you're talking about, AI-generated videos, AI-generated text, AI-generated audio, all of this, so much information is flooding the market, and even educated people cannot easily tell the difference, what is true and what's not true. So information is a lot like water. If somebody hands you a glass of water, you kind of reluctant to drink it because you know from thousands of years of history that water needs to go through quite a rigorous process before it's safe for human consumption. The same is true for information. Readily available information is probably very toxic to us as humans, but we don't really realize, we can't tell the difference yet. We haven't had the breakdown in society where we could learn the consequences of dangerous information. But you talk to people today, nobody agrees on anything. Everybody has a different perspective. Nobody's objective. Nobody's looking at data and evidence and facts and logic and reason and science, critical thinking, objective truths, natural law. Nobody reads a book anymore. In American society, it took me 5 years to work on this book. Every word, every sentence, every paragraph, every chapter After I finished, I read the book 5 times. I gave it to other people to read. So we put enormous rigor. And in the general society now, if you ask people when was the last time, if they read a book in 2024, maybe 50-55% will say they read a book last year. In our community, in the Muslim community, if you ask, it's like 2%. Like 2% of people that read a book, or people just don't read books anymore. So, we are inducing toxins into ourselves in the form of information that hasn't gone through this rigorous process. So I thank you for bringing that up, giving me an opportunity to explain the danger of poor quality information, whether it be videos, fake videos like you're talking about, or just fake texts. We're being drawn down into these silos, and in the silo, we're surrounded people just like us, and we're talking about the same thing. We share the same perspective, so we think it must be true. But we're not being objective anymore. We're not reading the books anymore. We're not listening to the scholars and the lectures. We're just hanging out with people who think like us, talk like us, and that's our truth now. Please.
What's the role of governments in mitigate AI risk mitigation, and how they can balance between innovation and regulation?
Yeah, thank you. That's I was touching on that earlier. Seeing that the European Union is probably the only adult in the room right now. They're very thoughtful, very careful. They have best-in-class regulations on AI. Whether it's China or the United States, who are the great powers in AI today. I was mentioning Stuart Russell at University of California, Berkeley. He's saying that we're spending about $1 on AI safety recently, what we're investing in commercial and military applications of AI. So we're not doing a good job at all. There are very sophisticated organizations that have come together in the United States at the government level under the Biden administration. But with the turn that our country has taken, the focus is more on kleptocracy, oligarchy. The focus is more what's in it for me. So we're doing a very poor job. To answer your question, I think we're doing a pretty poor job, and probably like we're seeing a breakdown in aviation recently. Perhaps there will be some breakdowns in this domain that might wake people up that you can't do this. You really need to regulate this.
The term world order is used a lot as kind of a scaremongering tactic or a fear-mongering tactic, but there are also terms being used here like oligarchy and whatnot that seemed previously available only to scholars. And so it's got me asking in part, is there ever been a truly halcyon period? That sounds like a question that also ironically has to be answered by AI. That
Let me answer that for you. I think we can talk philosophically about is this some halcyon days have we reached sometime utopia? The answer is no, but it's relative. So I was talking about the court of Louis XIV in Versailles, and they were expending 50 to 80% of the budget on militarism. Today, that very same country, you'll have a riot in Parliament if you ask them to raise the budget to 2.5% or 3%. So in relative terms, these are the safest times that we have ever lived in. Point is taken, we are not there where we should be. There is a way to go. And so probably the best thing to do is to look at the best of what we've done and try to enhance upon that, improve upon that. But, yeah, so things are definitely better. This is the safest period. If you go back a few centuries, pre-Second World War, the leading causes of death were war, infectious diseases, and famine. Today, the leading causes of death are cardiovascular health, accidents, and cancer. Those three don't even factor anymore. So yes, it's definitely a much safer world than it was before. Are we where we should be? I think we still leave a lot to be desired.
thank you, because it's 1 o'clock now. I just want to thank him, and also I want to make a couple of announcements. You know, this continuing education program or Sunday afternoon program